Hey guys, welcome to Priceless B Movies. I'm your host, Colin Price, and I guess this has been a long time coming. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved horror, much often to the annoyance of my parents. I can't tell you how often when I was a kid in the 90s, my dad would walk in and catch me watching Tales from the Crypt, the TV show, the HBO TV show. We didn't have HBO at the time, but they would run the reruns on Fox and on Sci-Fi Channel. And even though both my parents knew I had this fascination with horror, they always tried to get me to watch like the Universal horror movies, the Hammer horror movies, and I did. But of course, I was bound to discover some of the more gruesome stuff that was popular at the time, Freddy, Chucky, and of course on TV, Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt, the show, is obviously based on the EC comics from the 50s that were very popular for their time, and the show was very popular in the 90s. I know even still a lot of people talk about it. M. Night Shyamalan, of all people, tried to reboot it a few years ago. Thank God that never happened. But even though I knew what the show was when I was a kid, it wasn't until I was like 12 or 13 that I found out that even before the show, there had been other film adaptations of the comics, two in particular from the early 70s. And then, of course, once the show was popular, there were three different spin off films. There was Demon Knight, Bordello of Blood, and Ritual. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a whole series of videos on Tales from the Crypt since I love it so much? So I'm going to do several videos reviewing all of the different Tales from the Crypt films, and hopefully an extended video once that's all done, where I go through the show and discuss my favorite episodes from each season. So for the next month or two, Priceless B Movies is basically going to be the Tales from the Crypt review show, whether anyone really likes it or not. All right, starting from the beginning. Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt is a British anthology film from 1972 that was released by Amicus Productions. They did a lot of these kinds of movies back in the late 60s, early 70s. They weren't as successful as Hammer, but they were just as gory and usually a little more mean-spirited. The film takes a different approach than the show does. The film has five different people who get lost in a cemetery while on a tour of these catacombs, and they come across a robed figure known only as the Crypt Keeper. Here, he's not a decrepit, wisecracking skeleton, but instead he's played much more straight as he kind of actually just looks like a monk played by Ralph Richardson. The Crypt Keeper sits these five people down and proceeds to tell them stories about these horrible things that presumably will happen to them in the future. The first story is called And All Through the House. Now, if you were familiar with the TV show, you'd know this was one of the more popular episodes of the show. It had Larry Drake as this deranged Santa Claus stalking this murderess on Christmas Eve. Um, Several of the stories in Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, the two 70s films, were eventually redone, heavily rewritten and redone as episodes of the TV show, so it can get a little confusing, but I'm only going to review how they portray the stories in these films. And All Through the House, in Tales from the Crypt, is probably my least favorite of the five stories. It's just the most straightforward one. Tales from the Crypt I always thought was better and more interesting when there was some supernatural aspect at play. Not that the crime stories couldn't be interesting, but I just think at the end of it, it is just this guy stalking this woman through a house for 20 minutes. And it's not, I don't think it was as well done as the episode of the TV show. I'm just going to flat out say it. Joan Collins is very good in her role, but ultimately is forgettable and doesn't have the impact that it did when the show did it 2 decades later. The next short is called Reflections of Death. It's about a guy who is having an affair with his wife and is running away with his secretary, and the two of them end up in a car crash, and he awakens with this strange case of amnesia, trying to find not only help but trying to figure out what exactly had happened. This is by far the shortest story in this series, in this film, so there isn't a lot to it. Frankly, to tell you any more about the plot would be to just give away the ending, which I'm not going to do. I like this one for the twist, but it's a twist that I think a lot of people will see coming. That doesn't mean it's not executed very well, though. I enjoyed it. The third story, Poetic Justice, is by far my favorite. It stars Peter Cushing as a kindly old man in this neighborhood who all the kids love him, the neighbors love him, except for the two guys who live directly across the street. They can't stand him for a variety of very trivial reasons. These guys are just snobs. And they decide that they're going to subject Peter Cushing's character to a number of just horrible things. They make it so that his dogs are taken away and put to death. They make him look like a pedophile so that the parents won't let him see their children. And after his wife had passed away, that's like his only like the humanity is like making these kids happy. So it really destroys him. These guys just do a real number emotionally on Peter Cushing's character. It's really sad to watch. But then, of course, we get to the Tales from the Crypt twist, in which revenge is enacted, and oh man, in the best Tales from the Crypt stories, it's not enough that the bad guys are going to get their comeuppance. You have to really hate them up until the moment they do, because when whatever horrible thing happens to them, you want it to be, you want to cheer, you want to be like, yeah, fuck that guy, and I do definitely think that this story is the best in the film because of that. The fourth story is called Wish You Were Here and is a fairly straightforward shot at doing the monkey's paw. In fact, that monkey's paw is even part of the story. They come up with the paw, and anyone who loves horror probably knows this old story. The monkey's paw grants you three wishes, but it's never exactly what you want. It's always twisted in some horrible way. Um, and it's I like it, but some of the gore effects, especially in the story, are kind of like, oh, really? I get it was the 70s, but that's the best you can do. There's a lot of the 70s red paint blood in this film, and sometimes it's effective given the silly nature of the story, and sometimes it just looks bad. Um, I'm kind of up in the air on this one still, and I've seen the movie a few times. Sometimes I watch it and I like it. Sometimes I watch it and I don't like it. Um, Anyone who's read The Monkey's Paw is going to know exactly where this is going. And like I said, I admire some of the ambition behind the effects, but especially in the last scene, they just really don't hold up. The fifth and final story is called Blind Alleys. This was another one that was done in the TV show, and I think the TV show once again did it a little better. It's about a military man who ends up taking over at a blind folks' home, and he's a very heartless man, very cruel man, and he decides he's going to suck up the funds that he's been given to feed and to house these people. And he's going to cut corners everywhere he can so that he himself can live extravagantly. So you have these scenes where, these poor older people who can't see, are left without heat, are left with very little food while he's sitting in his office eating steak and drinking expensive wine. And he's just a real dick. It's not too long before these guys decide they're going to rise up against him. And this was another one like Poetic Justice where, you feel so sorry and so sad for these characters, but then when they do what they do, you just get this awesome feeling in you of like, yeah, once again, like, yeah, fuck that guy. This is what makes Tales from the Crypt so fun, is because they're all moralistic stories and they're at their best when the punishment fits the crime. It doesn't always hit, but I do think that for the most part, you can watch this film, and as long as you appreciate the time period it came out, you will enjoy how they executed some of these stories. Like I said, the Monkey's Paw one, I wasn't that big a fan of. I still kind of am up in the air on that one. And the first one, I think, is just, with the Santa Claus, I think it's just kind of boring. Um, but for what this is, a 70s anthology film, it's definitely above a lot of the others that came out at the time. Of course, I can't even wrap up this review without getting to the twist at the end of the story, the wraparound. The Crypt Keeper's been telling these people these stories about what's going to happen to them. There is a final twist at the end, and once again, the way it's executed is a little silly, but like in a fun camp factor way. I think a lot of people who are horror fans and who are fans of Tales from the Crypt, especially fans of the comics, will enjoy it. But they were very obviously limited by what they could do with their budget. So I could see some people watching this film, watching certain parts, and being like, "Wow, that doesn't even look good enough for a cartoon." But okay, I guess we'll just take that because that's what it is. Tales from the Crypt, I'll give 3 stars too. I think it's a fun movie, but it definitely has its flaws. And a couple of the stories that they do were done better in the show later on. Still, if you're a fan, it's definitely worth looking into. That's my review of Tales from the Crypt. Stay tuned. I got more reviews coming, including the remaining 4 Tales from the Crypt films. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more Priceless B movies.